Chapter 8, Mishnah 2. What is the minimum amount of food required to establish an Eruv Techumin? Enough food to supply 2 meals for each and every person relying on it. Since the point of the Erev is to establish a legal Shabbos residence for the user, it must have enough food to sustain him for Shabbos. The Mishnah now defines the size of the meals under discussion. The first two options base their definitions on how much each Erev user actually consumes at a meal. 2 meals refers to each Erev user's portion of food for his 2 daily weekday meals and not his portion for the larger Shabbos meals. These are the words of Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Huda says it refers to his portion for the Shabbos meals and not for the larger weekday meals. And both Rebbe Meir and Rebbe Huda intend to rule leniently. Each bases his ruling on the meal at which the person eats less, though they disagree as to which meal that is. According to Rebbe Meir, a person generally eats less at weekday meals than at the tastier Shabbos meals. The amount of food needed for the Erev is therefore the amount he eats at 2 weekday meals. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that since an extra meal is eaten on Shabbos, most people eat less at each Shabbos meal. Thus, the Erev is based on what a person eats at his Shabbos meals. According to both of the above views, the size of the Erev is defined by the actual eating habits of the person using it. The next two views maintain that the size of the Erev for any user is what an average person eats at 2 meals. The Mishnah now states the amount of food needed when bread is being used to establish the Erev. Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka says, each user's portion is a loaf of bread sold for a pundion, a small coin, at a time when 4 se'ah of wheat could be purchased for a selah, a large coin. This equals the volume of 6 eggs. Rabbi Shimon says the portion for each person is 2/3 of a loaf, when 3 loaves of bread are made from a kav of wheat. Since each loaf is 1/3 of a kav, which equals the volume of 8 eggs, and only 2/3 of a loaf is required for the Erev, the required food portion per person equals the volume of 5 1/3 eggs. Rabbi Shimon's measure is thus 2/3 of an egg less than Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka's. It emerges from the above that Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka and Rabbi Shimon disagree as to whether the loaf of bread under discussion equals the volume of 6 eggs or 8 eggs. The Mishnah now notes that the dispute about loaf size affects 2 other laws as well. Half of the loaf discussed above relates to the law of a house affected with saras. If someone enters such a house and stays for the length of time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread, the clothing that he is wearing becomes tameh as well. Obviously then, the amount of time needed for the clothing to become tameh depends on the size of the loaf. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, it is the amount of time it takes to eat half of a 6-egg loaf, while according to Rabbi Shimon, it is the time it takes to eat half of an 8-egg loaf. And half the loaf discussed above, i.e. 1/4 of it, relates to the law of making a person's body pasul for terumah. That is, if food equal to 1/4 of the loaf mentioned above is tameh, and a person eats it, he becomes disqualified pasul from eating terumah. Here too, the amount of food that must be consumed to become pasul depends on the loaf size under discussion. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, it is the size of 1.5 eggs. According to Rabbi Shimon, it is the size of 2 eggs.